Hi everyone. Today let me continue the chapter The Rattrap. The Ramso ironworks, which are now closed down, were not so long ago a large plant with a smelter, rolling mill, and forge. So we know that the Rattrap peddler was trapped in a forest, and he was feeling hopelessness because of not finding the way out of the forest. As he was walking a lot, he felt tired and laid on the ground. But when he put his head on the ground, he heard the sound of hammer strokes from an iron mill. So, a hope came into his mind of finding out someone near the area. With that hope, he started moving to the direction from where he was hearing the sound. Now, the narrator is saying about the Ramso ironworks. Once it was a large plant, means that it was a large factory with smelter, rolling mill, and forge. Actually, what is the meaning of smelter? Smelter means that a machine in which metal is melted. And what is the meaning of rolling mill? It is a machine to roll metal into sheets. And forge is that it's a furnace for shaping metal by heating it. So now it's actually closed down. But not so quite long ago, it was a large factory with smelter, rolling mill, and forge. In the summertime, long lines of heavily loaded barges and scows slid down the canal. So, what's the meaning of heavily loaded barges and scows? Barges and scows, which means that long flat bottom boards. Okay, and slid down means move down. Okay, so during the summer season, long flat bottomed boats carrying the material would slid down the canal. Means that they would come down the canal, which led to a large island lake for supplying material to the mill. And during the winter time, the roads would be changed into black due to the coal dust that come along because of the transportation of the charcoal crates. So sifted down means that sprinkling down. Crates means that charcoal boxes. Okay, so from this we can understand that it was a very big factory, and the works were going on throughout the year. During one of the long dark evenings, just before Christmas, the master smith and his helper sat in the dark forge near the furnace waiting for the big iron which had been put in the fire to be ready to put on the anvil. So we already know that it was the month of December. It was long dark evening just before Christmas. So the master smith and his helper, here you can see the master smith and helper. Okay, so they were sitting in the dark forge near the furnace waiting for the pig iron. What's the meaning of pig iron? The crude form of the iron getting after melting. So the big iron was already in the fire. Okay, they were waiting for that to get it. So now the master smith and his helper were waiting for the big iron to be taken out of the fire. Okay, to be taken out of the fire. So here you can see they wanted to take it and to put it on the anvil. What is the meaning of anvil? A heavy iron block with a flat top and concave slats on which metal can be hammered and shaped. Every now and then, one of them got up to stir the glowing mass with a long iron bar, returning in a few moments, dripping with perspiration, though, as was the custom, he wore nothing but a long shirt and a pair of wooden shoes. So, from time to time or occasionally, either of them would go and stir the liquid, which was very hot. That big iron, which was very hot, it was in fire. And when they come back from that place, they would be sweating because they were going near the fire, which is so hot. So, here the dress you can see that they worn a long shirt and a pair of wooden shoes. All the time there were many sounds to be heard in the forge. So here the narrator is saying about the sounds that could be heard. Okay, as the forge is the workshop of the blacksmith, there would be different sounds to be heard from the forge. So actually, what are the different sounds that could be heard from the big bellows groaned and the burning coal cracked. So here they could hear the sound of the big bellows. What is this big bellow? It is a device that is used for blowing air. So then the fire can burn more quickly. And then then next sound that they could hear was the coal cracked. So the coal also cracked when it was burning. So, what are some sounds that could be heard? The sounds of the bellow groaning and the sound of the coal cracking. And the fire boy shoveled charcoal into the mow of the furnace with a great deal of clatter. And the boy who was sitting near the furnace also shoveling means throwing charcoal into the mow of the furnace. Mow means that the mouth of the furnace. So he was putting more and more charcoal. When the charcoal was fallen into the furnace, there was a great deal of clatter. So there was a lot of noise when the charcoal was putting into the furnace. And outside roared the waterfall, and a sharp north wind whipped the rain against the brick tiled roof. And not only these sounds could be heard, but also the sounds of the waterfall, and there was a sharp wind which was caused for the rain beating against the brick tiled roof. So there were a lot of noises could be heard from inside and outside of the furnace, outside of that mill. It was probably on account of all this noise that the blacksmith didn't notice that a man had opened the gate and entered the forge until he stood close up to the furnace. So, as the blacksmith was busy in his works, and there were a lot of noises also. So, that is why he didn't notice of the peddler opening the gate and entering the forge until he came close up to the furnace. Only then the blacksmith knew that a man entered the forge. Surely it was nothing unusual for poor vagabonds without any better shelter for the night to be attracted to the forge by the glow of light which escaped through the sooty panes and to come and to warm themselves in front of the fire. So it was a usual happening there. What is it? The poor vagabonds and the poor wanderers, means the harmless people, while they were going through the forest, they would be attracted to this forge due to the light coming through the window panes, which were covered with the dust of charcoal. That is why it is called as sooty panes. That window panes were covered with the dust of charcoal. So usually the vagabonds would come there for shelter and to warm themselves in front of the fire. So, like that, our peddler also came there to get a shelter. That's why the coming of peddler to that forge uh, was not an unusual for them. Okay, unusual thing for them. The blacksmiths glanced only casually and indifferently at the intruder. And so the blacksmith looked carelessly or without any interest at the intruder. Who is actually the intruder here? The peddler who came in without permission. He looked the way people of his type usually did, with a long beard, dirty, ragged, and with a bunch of rat traps dangling on his chest. So they also looked at this Rattrap peddler in the same way like the other people are looking at the beggars. So they looked at him without any sympathy, and they also listened the appearance of the peddler. Yeah, he listened that he had a long beard and he had one dirty and ragged torn clothes, and a bunch of rat traps were hanging down from his chest. He asked permission to stay, and the master blacksmith nodded a hearty consent without honoring him with a single word. So, after seeing the master blacksmith, The peddler asked him the permission to stay there, and the blacksmith, in a haughty manner, means that in an arrogant way, without saying any word, he just nodded his head to give the consent for staying there. The tramp didn't say nothing either. He had not come there to talk but only to warm himself and sleep. The tramp means that the wanderer. Who is the wanderer here? The peddler. He also didn't say anything because he knew that he had gone there only for getting shelter at that night. That's why he kept quiet. In those days, the Ramso iron mill was owned by a very prominent iron master whose greatest ambition was to ship out good iron to the market. Ship out means that to shape. Okay. He watched both night and day to see that the work was done as well as possible, and at this very moment he came into the forge on one of his nightly rounds of inspection. In those days, the Ramso iron mill was owned by a distinguished, prominent means a distinguished or a famous iron master whose only intention was to sell out fine and good quality of iron in the market. That's why he would come every day and night for inspecting the functionings of the factory. The and at this particular night also he came there for his night inspection. Naturally, the first thing he saw was the tall ragamuffin who had eased his way so close to the furnace that steam rose from his wet rags. When the ironmaster entered the forge, he first noticed this tall ragamuffin. Ragamuffin means that the person in rags. Who is the person in rags? It's our Rattrap seller. So, as the peddler was sitting near the furnace, the steam coming out of his wet, torn clothes. And the ironmaster didn't follow the example of blacksmiths who had hardly deigned to look at the stranger. So here the blacksmith, here what he had done, he had given him an indifferent look at the peddler. Okay, the blacksmith gave an indifferent look at the peddler when he asked him permission to stay there, and he didn't talk to him also. But unlike the blacksmith, the owner of the Ramso Iron Works, who deigned means that who stooped, okay, who stooped or bent down to look at the stranger. He walked closer to him, looked him over very carefully, then tore off his slouch hat to get a better view of his face. So here he deigned. Deigned means that he stooped or bent down to look at the stranger very closely, and he came very closely to him. He came very close to him and took off his bending hat to get a better view of his face. But of course, it's you, Nils Orff, he said. How you do look. So after removing the peddler's hat, he mistook the peddler as his old acquaintance, means that his old friend, Nils Orff. And he was so surprised of his appearance also. That's why he asked that, how do you look? The man with the rat traps had never before seen the Iron Master at Ramsu and didn't even know what his name was. So here, actually the peddler had never seen this Iron Master before and he didn't even know his name also. Here the Iron Master had mistaken the peddler as his friend. Okay. But it occurred to him that if the fine gentleman thought he was an old acquaintance, he might perhaps throw him a couple of kroner. Therefore, he didn't want to undeceive him all at once. So here what did the peddler did? So the peddler thought that he thought about the money that is going to get from the iron master, who may have given him a couple of kroner, and thinking about that terrible situation of his old friend. So sometimes the peddler thought that the gentleman here is that the iron master, he may have given him a couple of kroner by thinking about the terrible situation of his old friend, because here he had mistook him as his old friend. Okay, and here the peddler, he didn't reveal his identity and he didn't say that I'm not your old friend, because he thought that if he said that he would not get money from the iron master. undeceive. You can see the word undeceive here. What is the meaning of that? To tell someone that his belief is mistaken. So here the peddler was not ready to tell the iron master that he was mistaken. The man, yes, God knows things have gone downhill with me, he said. So the peddler told him that the things didn't go well with him. Okay, and you shouldn't have resigned from the regiment, said the iron master. That was the mistake. If only I had still been in the service at that time, it never would have happened. Well, now of course you will come home with me. So, when the peddler told this to him, the ironmaster replied that the big mistake you had done was your resignation from the regiment. So, you shouldn't have done that. He also added that if I were there at that time when you were resigning, I shouldn't have allowed you to resign. And after telling this, he invited the peddler to his home, thinking that he was his old friend, to go along up to the manor house and be received by the owner like an old regimental comrade. That, however, didn't please the tramp. But the peddler didn't like the idea of going along with the iron master to his manor house. Manor house means a large country house, and being treated like an old regimental comrade. Comrade means that a fellow soldier or a friend. Okay, so here he was not happy to go with him and to be treated like an old friend by the iron master in his house. He didn't like that idea of going with him. No, I couldn't think of it, he said, looking quite alarmed. So he said, now I couldn't think of it, looking quite alarmed. So here actually he was frightened of visiting the house of an old soldier, and he was also aware that it was not safe for him. He thought of 30 kroner. To go up to the manor house would be like throwing himself voluntarily into lion's den. Okay, so as he had the stolen money with him, he understood that it understood it very clearly that going to the house of Iron Master was like throwing himself to the lion's den. Means that going to the that manor house, it was just like throwing himself to the danger. Okay, he only wanted a chance to sleep here in the forge and then sneak away as inconspicuously as possible. He came to the iron mill only with the intention of getting a shelter at that night and then sneak away the place, means that then leave the place as inconspicuously as possible, means that without noticing by anyone. Sneak away means that leave the place. Inconspicuously means that without noticing. Okay, so here he wanted at that night only a shelter and leave the place without noticing by anybody. The ironmaster assumed that he felt embarrassed because of his miserable clothing. The ironmaster thought that now his friend was not ready to come to his home due to thinking of his clothes, his torn clothes. He was not ready to come his home, that he was feeling, sometimes he was feeling embarrassed or feeling ashamed because of his torn clothing. Please don't think that I have such a fine home that you cannot show yourself there, he said. Elizabeth is dead, as you may already have heard. My boys are abroad, and there is no one at home except my oldest daughter and myself. We were just saying that it was too bad we didn't have any company for Christmas. Now come along with me and help us make the Christmas food disappear a little faster. So here he was trying to make his friend comfortable by saying that he should feel free to come his home as his home was an ordinary one. He also told him that his wife is dead and she is no more, and his sons are settled in abroad, and only two are there in his home. He himself and his daughter. And he also said that they were feeling bad and loneliness without having a company for that Christmas. So here, the ironmaster is by mistake inviting the peddler, thinking that his friend, to his home for celebrating Christmas so that he and his daughter may have some good company at that Christmas feast. But the stranger said no and again no, and the ironmaster saw that he must give in. It looks as though Captain Wonsale preferred to stay with you tonight, says Dom. He said to the master blacksmith and turned on his heel, but he laughed to himself as he went away. And the blacksmith, who knew him, understood very well that he had not said his last word. So the ironmaster understood that whatever he said, the peddler was not ready to accept his invitation. So here he addressed his friend as what won't steal. Okay, Captain won't sail. So here he addressed his friend as Captain won't sail and told the blacksmith that his friend Captain won't steal wanted to stay there that night. And then the ironmaster turned on his heel means that he walked away. Okay, here he called blacksmith by his name and his name is here Stern Storm. Okay, and then the ironmaster laughed and went away. But the blacksmith knew that he was hiding something. It was not more than half an hour before they heard the sound of carriage wheels outside the forge, and a new gust came in. But this time it was not the ironmaster. He had sent his daughter, apparently hoping that she would have better powers of persuasion than he himself. So then the ironmaster went away. Within half an hour, a carriage came outside of the forge, and that a new guest came in, and that new guest was actually Ironmaster's daughter, whom he had sent to the forge to persuade the peddler, because the Ironmaster knew that his daughter was able to convince people more than him. So he sent the daughter to the forge to persuade this peddler. She entered, followed by a valet carrying on his arm a big fur coat. She was not at all pretty, but seemed modest and quite shy. And the daughter entered the mill, and she was followed by a valet, means that a personal attendant, and there was a fur coat in his hand. The ironmaster's daughter was not very beautiful, but she seemed to be simple and humble. And when she here the master blacksmith in the forge, everything was just as it had been earlier in the evening. So when she entered the forge, everyone was busy in the same way as they had been earlier. And the master blacksmith and his apprentice still sat on their bench, and iron and charcoal still glowed in the furnace. The master blacksmith and his helper, they were still sitting on the bench, and the iron and charcoal was still glowing in the furnace. The stranger had stretched himself out on the floor and lay with a piece of big iron under his head and his hat pulled down over his eyes. As soon as the young girl caught sight of him, she went up and lifted his hat. The man was evidently used to sleeping with one eye open. He jumped up abruptly and seemed to be quite frightened. Now the peddler was laying on the floor by putting a piece of big iron under his head as his pillow, and used his hat to cover his eyes. When she came close near to him, she lifted his hat. The man usually sleeps with one eye open. As soon as he saw this girl, he jumped up and seemed to be frightened and shocked. "My name is Edla Wilmanson," said the young girl. "My father came home and said that you wanted to sleep here in the forge tonight. And then I asked permission to come and bring you home to us. I'm so sorry, Captain, that you are having such a hard time." Now, when she came there and after lifting his hat, she introduced herself to the peddler. She said that her name is Edla Wilmanson. She said that my father told everything about you, that you wanted to stay here and not ready to come to our home. So I asked permission from my father to bring you to our home here. And she also addressed him as Captain and said that she was also feeling sorry about his bad and miserable time. She looked at him compassionately with her heavy eyes, and then she noticed that the man was afraid. Either he has stolen something or else he has escaped from jail, she thought. She looked at him compassionately means that sympathetically. She felt pity on him, so he looked at him kindly. So when she looked at him compassionately, she felt that the man was frightened. When she saw that fear in his eyes, she guessed that either he had stolen something or he had escaped from jail. And added quickly, "You may be sure, Captain, that you will be allowed to leave us just as freely as you came. Only please stay with us over Christmas Eve." So when she had seen the fear in his eyes, she made him feel comfortable by saying that he was free to leave their house at any time that but she only requested him to stay with their family just for the Christmas Eve. She said this in such a friendly manner that the Rattrap Peddler must have felt confidence in her. When she said all this, he felt a great confidence in her that is nothing bad is going to happen with him. He understood like that. "It would never have occurred to me that you would bother with me yourself, miss," he said. "I'll come at once." And he told her that I didn't think that you will consider so much like this. And then he accepted her invitation. Why did he accept her invitation? Because he behaved with him in such a good manner and in a compassionate way and told him that he can go from there at any time. And she also assured that there will be no problem for him. So he accepted her invitation. And he accepted the fur coat, which the valet handed him with a deep bow, threw it over his rags, and followed the young lady out to the carriage without granting the astonished blacksmith so much as a glance. So the valet bowed here means that with a lot of respect to this peddler, he handed over the fur coat to him, and the peddler put it over his rags, and then he went along with her to the carriage. Without looking at the startled or greatly surprised blacksmith, he went away with the ironmaster's daughter, Edla Wilmanson.